Let us start off with the first thing we are going to examine today. Forget the point number because those first 17 points have been covered in the last session. I want to start by looking at debt. About almost 30 years back, when I started business, loans were not easy to come by. Loans were something that were dispensed by a bank manager who was some sort of a demigod. Only when you were able to convince the bank manager that you did not need the loan. Today, loans are something that are very hard sold. Bank managers have targets, not just in collecting deposits, but also in dispensing loans. And a lot of people who do not need loans take loans. A lot of people who are not able to handle debt end up with debt. In fact, we are talking about something called the global financial crisis that people became aware of in the latter half of 2007 and where the ill effects were felt in India, possibly from January or February 2008 onwards. This whole so-called global financial crisis, which had its origins in the United States, was simply because of uncontrolled, ill-advised debt. When a large number of people who are incapable of servicing the loans they take, repaying the loans they take, are saddled with these kind of loans and then are not able to repay, there is a cascading effect when more and more people start defaulting. And if the primary security for those loans happens to be one category of asset like real estate, as it was in the United States, to recover the loans, the banks and the other lending institutions will now start selling real estate. And the more they sell, the more the prices fall down. And that is where the bubble bursts. All economic bubbles, whether in equity or real estate or bullion or any other assets that catch the fancy of investors from time to time, have the same characteristics. They may have their origins in something that has economic value. Because something has economic value, there is a rise in their prices. That is fine. Later on, hype is added to this and a huge bubble builds up. At some point of time, we have to prick that bubble. One example of a recent bubble which people in this city or perhaps this country would have experienced is a 10-year boom that we had in real estate between 2003 and 2013. I will speak to that when we come to real estate, but today, let's proceed with debt. What is the best situation that you can have where debt is concerned? The best situation you can have is not to have any loans. There is no doubt about that. At the same time, for certain things like purchase of an apartment or a house, maybe for meaningful higher education, the kind of higher education that can mean a substantial difference between your income earning capacity before that higher education and your income earning capacity after that higher education, yes, you may have to take an education loan. You may have to take a housing loan. When we are looking at the extinguishing of debt, getting rid of debt, it can mean two things. If we have debt, a program to get it down to zero. If we do not have debt, asking ourselves, should we take debt in the first place? And the answers to this are that we have to learn to distinguish between what is acceptable and what is unacceptable where debt is concerned. What is acceptable is any debt taken for a productive purpose. The acquisition of a house, the prices of even a humble 2-bedroom apartment may be well beyond the reach of most normal people today. So for that, if I have to take a loan, that is fine. I also gave you the other example of education. But today, we are seeing people living off 3 or 4 credit cards, taking high cost loans for things like holidays abroad, to throw lavish parties, for various functions, just to keep up a certain social status. This could be not just undesirable, it could be downright dangerous. One way of segregating between what is acceptable and what is unacceptable is to look at the loan itself and ask yourself, does this loan have a life? Does this loan have a term? Is there a period at the end of which the loan comes to zero? So, when you look at a housing loan, you can have very long-term housing loans, 20 years. But the fact remains that at the end of 20 years, it is zero. The fact remains that when you have paid your first EMI, equated monthly installment, some small portion of the principal has been repaid. So if you have taken a 30 lakh housing loan, you have paid your first installment. All financial institutions will front load the interest. So the vast portion of what you are paying in your first installment is not the repayment of the principal, it is the payment of the interest. Despite this, there is a tiny component of the principal that you are repaying when even you pay your first EMI. So the 30 lakh loan at the end of month 1 is no longer a 30 lakh loan. It may be a 29.95 lakh loan. At the end of 1 year, it will not be a 30 lakh loan. It will be a 29 lakh loan. At the end of 20 years, it will be zero. There is an inbuilt mechanism to extinguish it. If such a loan is taken for a productive purpose, I have no problem with the loan. So, viewed from this angle, housing and educational loans may be much better than things like credit card loans, personal overdrafts, which are open-ended. In fact, personal loans can be very dangerous. Personal overdrafts can be even more dangerous because if you are a good borrower, if you are servicing the loan well, your own bank manager will come to you and ask you to enhance the limit. Saying, why do you want only a 5 lakh personal overdraft? We are willing to give you 7.5 lakhs. We are willing to give you 10 lakhs. And one day, you may find yourself in a debt trap. I'll come to that a little later. It's easy to identify what is the worst type of debt anywhere in the world. And the worst type of debt anywhere in the world is credit card debt. Nothing is as expensive. Nothing is as ruinous. We play mental tricks upon ourselves. The total interest that we pay appears to us to be very small. Why? Because there is a limit to the credit. Compared to a 30 lakh housing loan, your credit card may give you 1 or 2 lakhs of limit. But your interest rates, you'll be very lucky if it is 30%. Most of them would be 40% plus. And when we find that the limit on one card is not enough, we slowly start going to our second card. You can use credit cards. I myself use a credit card. From day one, my instruction to my bank is that on the due date, the money has to be directly debited to my SB account. There is no question of even 1 day of credit. So I have used a credit card for years together and I have not paid a single rupee of interest. Now if that's how you are going to use a credit card, I have no quarrel with that. But otherwise, this is of course in lighter vein. But otherwise, you have to be very, very careful when it comes to using credit cards because this is very easy to identify. Credit card debt is simply the worst type of debt anybody can have. The second worst probably would be something like a personal loan and then a personal overdraft. In the last class, we had discussed about something called an emergency fund. That every family must build an emergency fund equal to 1 year's normal living expenses, rounded off to the next higher 1 lakh rupees. So if my normal living expenses are 40,000 rupees per month, 40 into 12 is 4.8 lakh, round it off to 5 lakhs. I must have 5 lakhs in something that's very liquid. This should serve as my emergency kitty. There is no need of any such thing as a personal overdraft. Never create a situation where you head for a debt trap. I have one advantage over many of you who are not in financial consultancy. We see cases where people get caught in a debt trap. I can never forget the example of a businessman who was a good businessman. And he was brought to me, he was not a client of my office, but he was brought to me by another client because he was in some sort of financial trouble. And when I started examining the case, I found that there is only one reason why he is in financial trouble. He has an overdraft of 50 lakh rupees he had at that time. And this was several years back, so 50 lakhs then was quite big. On which he was being charged something like 15 or 16% of interest. And this was wiping out his profits. He was a small businessman. So I asked him a question. How did you get into this situation? And his answer was stunning. His answer was, I do not know. And that answer is nothing to be laughed at. He did not start with a 50 lakh OD. When we went back, he started with something like 3 lakhs or 5 lakhs. Over the years, his friendly neighborhood bank manager would keep on provoking him to increase the OD because the bank manager had to meet certain targets. This businessman had a certain relationship with his bank manager. He wanted to help him. How? By paying more interest, by taking on more debt. And the moment your limits keep on increasing, you get careless. You get careless with collections. You get careless with fiscal prudence. And suddenly, a time comes when the debt overwhelms you. You are now no longer in control of the debt. So, this is when you find yourself in a debt trap. And that is why in periods like this, when loans are hard sold, let it be vehicle loans, let it be credit card debt, when all these things are hard sold, we should develop an equal and opposite level of resistance to this kind of hyped up hard selling. Eric Tyson, who is a very good financial author, he says the financially healthy amount of bad debt is 0. That's what I told you at the beginning. The best situation is not to have any loans. This is also an old saying. We buy things that we don't need with money that we don't have to impress people we don't like. Half the time, we are just trying to keep up with our neighbors, with our peers in social circles. That's why I admire the people who just do not care about this. There are people who will drive cars costing 7 or 8 lakh rupees when they can afford easily to drive cars costing 10 times that much. They just do not want to be seen in those. There are other people who live an absolutely flashy lifestyle. I have examined several of those cases. When the case comes to us, we find that their apartment is under a housing loan. Their vehicle is under a vehicle loan. They are at the outer limit of 3 or 4 credit cards. They have got a personal loan, a personal overdraft. And they are living for all public purposes. Very flashy lifestyle. Without the assets to back it. There are other people whom you would really think are genuinely poor. But when you examine the case, it's not so. They don't have loans. They have tremendous amount of assets. They just do not want to be seen in the best cars, eat in the best hotels, throw the most lavish parties, or have the latest and the most expensive gadgets. This is just a lifestyle statement. As one of my very old clients says, something which I want to repeat here. When we were discussing this very point, and the man is extremely wealthy, extremely wealthy. He's just probably above a high net worth individual and close to ultra high net worth individual. He said, when this whole thing of hype and style came about, he said, of course I'm stylish, he says. Simplicity is my style. A beautiful statement. Simplicity is my style. We talked in the last session about personal financial planning a little bit, something that Simplus is very good at. And we saw that the whole objective of personal financial planning is to put you in control of your financial life. Now, when you take debt, please note that some other entity is in control of your financial life. If you take a loan, you have to repay the principal amount of the loan. You have to pay interest on that loan. To that extent, some other entity or individual is in control of your financial life. So the only way you can regain control is to get rid of that particular financial obligation. Is there a thumb rule? We were discussing thumb rules when we last met. 10% of net income for retirement, for example, would be one thumb rule. 1 year's normal living expenses rounded off to the next higher 1 lakh for an emergency fund. Is there a thumb rule about how much of debt you can take on? Yes, there is. First, ensure that all loans taken are term loans and for productive purposes. The end purpose that you're taking the loan is very important. Second, ensure that monthly repayment of all loans put together does not exceed 25% of net or take-home family income. Let me give you an example. If there is only one working member in the family, the earnings are 50,000 rupees per month. Whatever you repay on the loan front should not exceed 12,500 per month. Now let's say husband and wife are both working. Each of them is earning 50,000 a month. Total family income is 1 lakh. We always talk about net income. Net income is after deductions, after taxation. So I'm assuming that. You can afford to take loans, the repayment of which is 25,000 rupees a month. And let us say, in another case, husband earns 50,000, wife earns 50,000. The family already has an apartment, and that apartment is let out. It's not their house in which they are living. They are getting 20,000 rupees of net rental on it after all expenses. Now we have a net income of 1,20,000 per month. You can go up to loans where you have to repay 30,000 a month. These are prudential norms. These are prudential norms. The whole purpose of such norms are to ensure that you do not get caught in a debt trap. Is there something sensible we can do in prepaying loans? Lot of times, people ask me, what about prepayment? Should we prepay? Should we not prepay? On a housing loan, we have tax benefits. Does it make sense to prepay? The answer is very simple. How is the loan structured? The repayment of the loan is structured based on equated monthly installments. Your monthly figure is fixed. Even if it is a long 15, 20-year loan, it is fixed. You're going to pay that same amount every month. But when you examine the loan, every bank will give you a printout of how your loan will be repaid on the principal side, on the interest side. Supposing you are repaying something like 35,000 rupees on a 30 lakh loan, you will find that in the initial stages, almost everything you repay, 95% or more of what you're repaying is the interest. So even if you have paid 5 years of installments and then for some unfortunate reason you have to default, you will find that a huge amount of the principal is still outstanding. This is a trick that all financial institutions play. If they are playing tricks, we too can play tricks. Now, what is the trick that we can play? We will have certain what I call their irregular surpluses. Let's examine those irregular surpluses. Somebody can give us gifts. We can get bonuses when we are working in our jobs. When you have businesses, there are times where you get lesser profits, there are times where you get slightly above average profits. Along the way somewhere, especially when we are looking at 15, 20-year loans, you can get an inheritance. You can get increases in pay. The increases in pay can be not just because you continue working in one job. You may also change jobs. You may make a sudden change from a 30,000 a month job to a 50,000 a month job. Sometimes if you go abroad, the increase can be much more pronounced. If you are a professional, all professionals also know that there are certain times of the year where we earn a little less, certain times of the year when our billing is more. Even doctors, surgeons, all these people, the income may not be totally regular. The fact of the matter is, if we examine our lives over several years, there are times when we get these irregular surpluses. I would advise all these irregular surpluses to go into prepaying loans. To what extent? To the extent that the principal that you have originally taken gets reduced to exactly 50%. Giving you the example once again, 30 lakh housing loan, what should be my objective where prepayment is concerned? My objective should be whatever irregular surpluses I get along the way, I am going to use for prepayment of the loan until the 30 lakhs gets reduced to 15 lakhs of principal. Once it is reduced to 15 lakhs of principal, then I am not going to really focus that much on prepayment. Why? Because once a loan is reduced to 50%, substantial portion of what you are now repaying goes towards the repayment of principal, not just towards interest. This is one of the most important pieces of advice a financial advisor can give to any normal individual. Let's move into the second area that I want to deal with today. When we last met, I presented looking at investment from 3 angles. I said, let's not talk about bank fixed deposits, public provident fund, employees provident fund, equity mutual fund, equity share. Let's talk about investments falling under 3 categories. First is an emergency fund, the second a retirement fund, and the third a general investment fund. Today, without in any way contradicting what I've said there, when we actually come to the latter part of our lives and we have to use our money, how do we use it? What will this money do to work for us? And when we understand that, once again we can view it from 3 angles, like a tripod, like a photographer's tripod over there. When we use the investment tripod, this is what will happen to us. This saying by Frank Netti, a very good consultant on retirement planning. He said, sound investment will decrease the time during which you work for money and increase the time during which money will work for you. And to understand the investment tripod, investment can be for 3 purposes. The first is parking funds. The second is earning regular returns. The third is for growth. These are the 3 main reasons why we invest, why we build up surpluses and corpuses, at some point of time, these three objectives will be useful or necessary in a person's financial life. Let's briefly look at them. The first is parking. There are two types of parking, as you can see at the heading there. One is called pure parking, one is emergency funding. Emergency funding, there is nothing much to explain. We dealt with it the last time, but for those of you who are not there, I've already explained it. Every family, not individual, every family must have one emergency fund equal to 1 year's normal living expenses in something very safe, very liquid. I should be able to cash it in 24 hours to meet an emergency. Now, pure parking is a little different. Parking, keeping something somewhere temporarily. I have sold a piece of real estate. I got 60 lakhs for that. With this amount of 60 lakhs, I want to buy another piece of real estate. Now, buying real estate is not like going to a supermarket and picking up something off the shelf. You may get real estate you like in a fortnight. You may not get it for 3 or 6 months. But when you get it, the money should be paid. Till then, it has to be parked somewhere. Now, these avenues that you see here, from the humble savings bank account, to flexi deposits, to even long-term bank fixed deposits where there is no prepayment penalty, to a variety of very short-term and safe mutual funds. All of these can be used both for emergency funding as well as pure parking. The second leg of our investment tripod is investing for regular returns. Here, most of us are experts because we know a good deal about these kinds of investments. There are small savings investments of which the post office monthly income scheme is quite attractive. There is this instrument called the 8% taxable Government of India savings bonds. Nobody has even looked at it for the last 3 years because bank deposit interest rates were far higher. But we used it quite a bit when about 6 or 7 years back, the bank deposit rates actually fell in this country to about 5.5 or 5.25%. And they can go there again. Now the 8% taxable government bond, the interest rate has not changed for quite a long time. I'm not saying it cannot change, it can change, but we find that the 8% has been there for more than 12 years now. So if you have to earn regular returns, and you look around and you find that the longest term bank fixed deposits is giving you just 6%, there is an alternative if you go and look for it at that time. For senior citizens, of course, there is the Senior Citizen Savings Scheme, which is quite a good scheme. And then we have got some things from bank fixed deposits to certain type of debt mutual funds, and going all the way down to even regular withdrawals from your PPF account. There are a lot of people who have built up substantial corpuses, well over 1 crore rupees, in their public provident fund accounts by investing the maximum allowed over 3 to 4 decades. Nothing prevents you from now using it. Actually, the purpose of the PPF is exactly that, to provide a safe and stable retirement avenue for normal people who do not have things like the Employees Provident Fund. So a lot of people handle the PPF very sensibly. If they have built up a sufficient investment corpus in the PPF, what they then do is they estimate their normal annual expenditure and accordingly they withdraw. Maybe they withdraw a little more. This is a very good way of handling it, and your PPF can serve retirement needs for a very long time. But let me come to now a very important insight, because this is one area where people make tremendous mistakes in their financial lives. What is the role of regular returns investments like bank deposits, which take money and give a steady return? Regular returns investments are advised only when you need regular returns. This is where people make the mistake. When we are of an age where we are able to work and earn money, either from employment or from our profession or from our business, please understand that the money that we earn from these avenues is our regular return. During this portion of our working life, say from the early 20s or the mid 20s to the early 60s or the late 50s, a period of 35, 40 years. During this period, if we keep our surpluses back in things like bank fixed deposits, which are essentially regular returns avenues, number one, we are going to get a lesser income. Number two, all these things are taxable avenues of investment. A 9% bank fixed deposit is only 6.22% for a person in the 30.9% tax bracket. The mistake we do is, we look at what is called the coupon rate. Coupon rate is the rate of interest printed on your certificate or your FD receipt. That is the wrong rate to look. If at all that rate is correct, then you should be paying no tax. If your total income is less than 2,50,000, including the interest on the bank fixed deposit, I will agree that the coupon rate is your rate. Otherwise, the rate to look at is something called the post-tax rate, the net rate. No businessman looks only at his turnover. The businessman will look after all expenses at the net profit after tax, NPAT. This is the important figure. This is the net result of his endeavors in his business. Same thing applies for investment. It is never the coupon rate. It is the post-tax rate. So if you are not paying tax, 9%, what you see is what you get. But if you are paying tax in the 30.9% bracket, you see 9%, you get 6.22%. 9% is irrelevant. It is only the 6.22% that is relevant to you. Now, if you are going to invest throughout your working life in bank fixed deposits, the interest alone will propel you over a period of time into the highest tax bracket. And what you get ultimately post-tax will not even equal inflation, because in the last 6 decades in this country, the average inflation rate has been 9 to 9.5% on the consumer price index side. Never look at the wholesale price index, that's a work of fiction. On the CPI side, we have got 9 to 9.5% of inflation in this country over a very long time. The only hope is that at last, both the government, not just this government, but the last 2 or 3 governments and the Reserve Bank of India appear to be now serious about controlling inflation. I sincerely hope their efforts succeed. What is the lesson to be learned? The lesson to be learned is, when we don't need regular returns, or in other words, when our regular returns are provided by our economic productivity, by our effort, by our work, by our employment, by our profession, by our business. In this period, what we must do is to follow what's called a balanced asset allocation plan with a considerable focus on growth investments. This is the most important lesson of regular returns. When we come to retirement, then a portion of our growth investments can be reconverted to regular returns investments if required, or the real good investors do not do that. The real good investors have a program of systematic withdrawal from the growth investments itself. Does not matter if you want the psychological stability of regular returns. By all means, you can reconvert a portion of your growth investments to regular returns investments.